Hey guys, I'm Kevin, and today we're going to talk about more useful music theory for ukulele. So in my last video, we talked about some of the fundamentals like learning the string names and how to count. In today's lesson, we're going to dive deeper into chords and scales and how to put that all together. So get yourself tuned up and let's dive in. Before we get started, I highly recommend you go back and watch my last video on music theory. I left a link in the description for that, but that's going to give you all the fundamentals and basics that are going to help you grasp these concepts today. The first concept that I'd like to discuss today is chords and thinking about them as shapes, not just chords that you learn off of a little chord chart. So, for example, we have an A chord. Well, the A chord, fine and dandy that we know how to play that, that's great, but I want you to think of this A chord as actually a shape that can be moved and turned into other chords. So take a look at this. We have our A major here, which I play with my ring finger and middle finger on the G and C string. So now, because I know, because I've learned the notes of the neck, that if I move this chord to another place, it will take on a different name. Well, it's A here because the second note on the G string is A, which is the root of this chord. If I move this over to the 3rd fret, it is no longer A, it is now a B flat note. So now I have these two notes played here that are same as the A position, but because I moved, I have to compensate for that empty fret now and put a bar down, and now this A shape becomes a B flat. So we have now B flat here using an A shape. If I move again and I take this ring finger over 1 fret, it now becomes B. And now the chord becomes B. So with this shape, you now have a B flat, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, and so forth. So now with just one shape, you have a whole bunch of chords you can use across the neck, and all you need to do is for this shape, follow that the root note, as it moves and changes names, so does the chord. So the same thing works if I were to turn this chord into an A minor. So A minor, I'm just playing here with my ring finger again to free up this finger here. I'm playing this on the A note. So G, G sharp, A is an A minor chord. But if I move this A note over again to B flat, now put the bar down on the 1st fret, that A minor chord becomes B flat minor, and B minor, C minor, C sharp minor, D minor, and so forth. So again, with those shapes, you have a whole slew of major and minor chords now that you can play when you maybe need to find a chord like B flat minor that's not in your typical chord palette. You can use the shapes that you already know, like A major and A minor, to find those chords. So it's a really cool way to access a whole bunch of new chords that you didn't have before. Let's take a look at a couple more here. How about an F chord? So our F chord, I would typically play like this with my middle and index finger. And the root of that chord is right down here on the E string on the 1st fret. I have E, F, and there's my F note. So that F note tells me if the root is here, it's an F chord. But if I move the root, it's going to become something else. So I'm going to swap my fingers here to free up my index. I'm playing with my ring and my middle. And I'm going to move this chord shape, and the exact same thing happens. When this F note goes over to the 2nd fret, it becomes F sharp. Now the chord will become F sharp as well as soon as I put this bar down. So I move from F to F sharp to G. And this looks kind of like your G shape that you've done before. And I have G sharp. I have another A chord here, same as this A chord, but it's played using a different shape. I have a B flat chord. Now we had B flat here too. We have B flat here. So using these shapes now opens up a lot of different things. So I encourage you to take these shapes and play around in the first 7 to 10 frets and go through and try to name the chord as you go, following the note of the chord that's your root as you do that. The last one I'll give you here is for a D minor chord. So D minor, we would typically play like this. Instead, I'm going to swap and play with my ring, pinky, and middle finger, so I free up my index. And if I move this chord, I have my D note, which is on the C string of the 2nd fret. When I move that root, it's going to move the chord as well. So we go from D minor, and then I'll bar the 1st fret. Can you guess? Yep, it's D sharp minor. And then we have E minor, which you can kind of see this little shape fits right into there. F minor, F sharp minor, G minor, and so on. So on the free PDF that I'm including with this lesson, I'll have these shapes mapped out for you so you can check them out and try them on your own. But that's chord shapes. I really think it's important to learn about that and think about chords as shapes, not just that they are just the one thing that they are when you play them. The next concept I'd like to discuss is the major scale. So in our previous lesson, we talked about learning the major scale across one string. But that's not really an economical way of doing it. So the way that we actually play the major scale is in a vertical fashion, because we can quickly access the notes. So if you remember, the C major scale contains the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So when we played that on the open string, we played C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. The way that we're going to learn it now is to play it vertically. So we play C, D on the 2nd fret, and we have an E note here, but we also have the open E string. So we can play the scale E, F, G, and then we have an A note, which we could move up, or we could just use our open string again, A, B, C. So we'll go through it again, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So you're probably asking yourself, why should I spend any time learning the major scale? Well, the major scale tells us a lot of information about chords, but it's also how melodies are constructed if you, say, want to jam with somebody else who's playing a song in the key of C, which would contain chords that are all derived from the C major scale. And that's the reason why it sounds good together when you play a C chord, or somebody else is playing a C chord, and you play melodies from the C major scale. It all works together. So we have the C major scale here, which I encourage you to practice. Try to sing the notes as you play them is also a very helpful tool. But I also want to say that because you've learned this in this vertical pattern, this is just like a chord, it's a movable shape. So the root of our C major scale was here on our open C string, but if I make this into a D note for my first, now I can play the exact same pattern, but I will actually start with everything here on the 2nd fret, and it'll go D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. And then we go back. So it's exactly the same pattern as the C major scale, but I'm starting on the D note, so I have to follow the scale just like that. So the same thing would happen if I moved up another whole step from D to E. Now I have the E major scale. And again, on the free PDF, I'll include some graphics here for you to walk through these scales. But the cool thing about this is now, just by knowing the C major scale, theoretically, you could play the scale anywhere on the neck in any different key that you want to. And if you're playing with a group of other people, if you want to figure out, hey, what key are we in? We're in the key of D. Okay, boom, I can go to my D major scale, play the notes from that. And yes, playing scales, it's kind of boring and not really that fun to do, but if you take and play around with the scales and kind of pick out melodies from them, that's a really cool way to use it. So instead of just playing through the notes like do, re, mi, fa, so, take a couple of the notes and try to play them, and then you've got a little melody going. So the scales are really useful. I think they're a really helpful music theory tool as you play the uke. If you're digging the sound of my uke, head over to allforuke.com/shop. You can have a Kala ukulele for yourself. When you buy your Kala ukulele through AllForUke, you're supporting us, and we really appreciate it. Make sure you check it out. Concerts, sopranos, tenors, baritones, a wide selection of accessories, capos, and more. All for you, allforuke.com/shop. The next topic I'd like to discuss is using four-note chords. So typically we play triads, which are three-note chords such as C. And that's called a triad because it only contains three notes. So if we move on from three-note chords like C and G and A minor, and we move on to four-note chords, we're talking about chords like C major 7 and C dominant 7 or G major 7. Now why is that a four-note chord? And you can see I'm only holding down 3 strings or 1 string even sometimes. Well, it's again going back to naming the notes of a chord, which we talked about in our last lesson a little bit here. So a C chord, for instance, has the notes G, C, E, and C. So there's 2 C's in it. It's just a 3-note chord. But if we move our finger down here to the 2nd fret, that C note now has become a B note. So again, we have G, C, E, but now we have a 4th note, which is B. And a C major 7 chord is made up of C, E, G, and B, so it's a 4-note chord. Now why should you learn a 4-note chord versus just sticking with triads? Well, triads are fine. But if you want to add a little bit more color, add a little bit more character to the chords, I think learning some of these 4-note chords as a substitute is a good way of kind of adding more to your playing. And that's music theory getting used at its finest right there, just so you can kind of play some cooler stuff. So we've got a C major 7 chord. Let's say we want to play a basic C minor chord. So C minor is just played here on the 3rd fret, barring the C, E, A strings. And again, that's a 3-note chord. It contains E flat, G, C, and again, an open G note here. But if we want to make this into a C minor 7 chord, we just add this note here, which is a B flat note here on the G string of the 3rd fret. So again, it adds just a little bit more color to a chord. So you have major 7, you have minor 7. You also could do a dominant 7. So G7 is a chord you've probably played around with before, so you already have a 4-note chord in the palette. And if we take a look and dissect this chord here, we have G, D, F, and B. So again, there's a 4-note chord. So any of your 7 chords are going to be 4-note chords. If you move into 9ths and 11ths and 13ths, getting into some of the jazzier stuff, we're talking about no more than 4 notes being played on the uke, but they are actually 5- and 6-note chords sometimes. So expanding into some bigger chords, some better voicings is also going to propel your playing as you go on your uke journey. So we've talked about scales, we've talked about chords, we've talked about shapes. But now actually using an application for this is kind of merging all of those concepts into one, which could be called chord melody. But basically what you're doing is you're using the scale along with the chord shapes in the key. So we're going to keep it basic here in the key of C. Now again, we have chords in the key of C, which are all derived from the major scale. We have C major, D minor, E minor, F, G or G7, A minor, B diminished, back to C. So any of those chords are fair game. And then we have our notes of the major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So to merge these two concepts together, a cool way to do this is to pick out a few notes from the major scale and then land on a chord. So something really basic you could do here would just take the end of the scale. So I'm just going. So what I did there was I played 3rd fret, 2nd fret, 3rd fret on the E string, and then I landed on an F chord. Basically, C, B, G, F chord. And I could do that and land on a G7 chord and see how that sounds. It sounds okay. Let's try landing on an A minor chord. I kind of like that. Try it again. Now what if I pick out a second melody to get to another chord? Now I'm kind of putting together a chord melody. So my challenge for you is to take the major scale, the chords from the key of C, and to put together your own little chord melody sequences. You can choose the number of notes. I would err on the side of keeping it more simplistic. Pick 2 notes next to each other and pick a chord that you're comfortable with in the key. And try to start with that point. Write some different sequences out of chords and then pick out the notes. Now, I will tell you that the first sequence I showed you here, the reason it sounded good is because I was going C, B, G, and that G note nicely lands on the F because G is right next to F. So keep that in mind as you do this. So we've talked about scales, we've talked about chords, expanding your chords, and then putting everything together in this lesson. Again, I have a free PDF that you can download from the AllForUke site, and I'll have exercises and some different examples for you to go through along with diagrams. My name's Kevin. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.
Meet me down by the seaside. We can howl at the moon rise. Watch as the tide strolls in.